Hey everybody, this is Lenny Kaiser, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create a great snare. To me, creating a great snare is all about proper sample selection, layering, offsetting, and then processing. We're going to be going through 3 different snares in 3 different genres, using all built-in Ableton sounds and effects to do this. Here's an example of what we're going to do. There's a lot of different ways to recreate a snare drum. One way that I've found particularly useful is to break it down into 3 main components: the transient stage, the body, and then the tail. The transient stage is the first initial contact of the drumstick hitting the top surface of the snare. This stage is defined by a sharp spike and click sound. The next part is the body. This relates directly to the physical size of the snare drum and is caused by sound vibrations resonating inside of the drum itself. The last stage is the tail. This is a stage where the actual snare wires on the bottom of the drum are incited by the vibrations of sound. This creates that cracking and sizzling sound that makes a snare famous and makes it different than other drums. Okay, so let's start by building the dubstep snare first. We're going to want to grab a drum rack and go into Packs, Core Library, Samples, Drums, and Clap, and find our Clap 707. That's going to be our transient. And go into Tom 808 low. That's going to be our body. And snare 909 for our tail, because it's got some nice noise to it. And we're going to go into Max for Live, Max Instrument, and grab the drum synth clap to be a second tail there. So let's go ahead and rename these. Double click to create a new MIDI clip and add all of our sounds on the 3rd beat here. In dubstep, the snares usually land on that 3rd beat. So we want to move our transient a little bit in front of the other samples so that we hear it first, and we want to move our tails a little bit behind. And the reason we're doing this is to give everything a little bit of room to just breathe and happen and not sit directly on top of each other. So let's hear what we got now. So let's go into Audio Effects and grab an EQ8 and pull open the frequency display here so we can see what's going on. So the first thing we need to do is deal with the body. We need to get the body in a frequency range that snares usually live in. That range is going to be roughly between 120 hertz and 220 hertz. So I'm going to use the transposition here to bring our body sample up in frequency range to about 200 hertz. Now that's hitting in the right area. I want to add a overdrive distortion to it to just give it a little bit of grit. Widen the band here so it's affecting all the frequencies. And we just want to give it a little bit right now because we're going to give it some more later. So let's listen to the transient and the body together. Sounds a little bit too much like a clap, so I'm going to move the start point on the clap to just the very end here. So I just have a sharp spike. And I'm going to add a little bit of overdrive and EQ to roll off some of the low end, since a lot of the low end is being held down by the body. We can brighten this up with a high shelf filter. And let's hear it with the tail, which we're also going to add an EQ to roll off the low end and boost some of the high end. We're going to use the attack on the volume envelope here on the tail to also roll off some of the attack stage, just to give room for everything else to happen. And let's hear with our drum clap, our synth here. We're going to want to lower the volume of this, bring up the brush sound, bring up the decay on the brush, and also the attack time, slow it down. So now we kind of have that nice bite, that sizzle, and that crackle at the end. To add a little bit of room and dimension to this, let's add reverb to the tail sounds. So I'm going to use Bright Room, drag it right after tail 02 here, dial the wet dry back. Now what we're looking for when we're choosing reverbs for this is we want to choose ones that have a decay time roughly around 500 milliseconds, something pretty fast. Now you can use the chain list here to mix the levels of the snares together. And this is the beauty of it, is now we have each on their own individual drum rack pad and chain, and we can turn things down. So if the tail is too loud, we can adjust that. Pull the wet dry back a little bit to 17% there. So now we're done processing the individual sounds. Let's talk about processing them all together. We want to add a little bit of overdrive. We're going to add a glue compressor, and we're going to add a saturator. Change the order here so it's EQ, overdrive, saturator, glue compressor, and then at the end we're going to add in some reverb. Let's go in and choose Snare Room. So from here, let's turn these devices off as we go. So add our overdrive. I'm going to dial back the overdrive on that transient. There we go. Let's go back to our overdrive on top of all of our sounds and go ahead and widen the frequency band so it's distorting the full frequency range. Okay, and let's add a little bit of saturation. Okay, so let's add some compression now and turn our ratio to 10:1 and dial our threshold back till we start to see a little bit of gain reduction here. And we want our attack time to be fast enough to catch the transient, but not too fast, because that'll squash it too much. And if it's too slow, the snare will go through unaffected. So we're just looking to clamp down on that a little bit. So adjust it to where you feel it needs to be. For the release time, you want that to be fast enough that it's coming back before the next time the snare hits. So as a tip, you can watch the needle and use your ears at the same time to see if the release is coming back before the next snare hits. I'm going to turn on this soft clip section, which this activates a wave shaper, which hardens up and brightens up our sound, makes it a little more gritty also. And because we're seeing a little bit of gain reduction here, I'm going to use the makeup gain to make up for that. And finally, add a little bit of reverb. Pull the wet dry back a lot. And see how it sounds in the track. And that's how you make a great dubstep snare. The main thing that's different about the drum and bass snare is that it's going to be a little bit higher in pitch. The 3 samples that I've chosen for this are the clap 707 for the transient, the snare 707 for the body, and an acoustic snare for the tail. We want to raise up the pitch on all of these so that it's a little bit higher. So let's start with the tail and see where it's at. So it's at about 195. Let's transpose it up 2 semitones. So now it's at 220. Now what we're going to do with the body is we want to bring it up and match it so that it's at a similar frequency or essentially in tune with this snare. So you want to think we're tuning the body to this tail snare now. Now let's add the transient. Sounds good. As far as processing on these channels, I added an EQ to the transient, rolled off some of the lows. To the body, I added an EQ, rolled off some of the lows, added overdrive. Just add a little grit. And on the tail, also added an EQ, boosted some of the high end, and an overdrive. From there, as far as final processing on all 3 of them, added an EQ, just rolled off some of the bottom end here, boosted a little bit of the high frequencies. Added a little bit of compression, medium attack, medium to fast release, and a bit of saturation. Okay, so let's move on to the Electro House snare. So I've decided that sometimes it doesn't have to be that complicated. So for this version, we're only going to be using 2 sounds, the clap 909 and the snare 707. And the main thing that's adding a lot is an overdrive to the snare 707. Let's do something a little bit interesting with this. So what I want to do is set up a gated reverb for this. So you can do this all within inside of Drum Rack. The first thing you want to do is show the chains list here and click on the sends and the returns section within the Drum Rack. We're going to want to locate a reverb. In this case, I'm going to use a convolution reverb. And you want to find something that has a long tail, so something like a hall or a long plate will work good. So let's go for Boston Hall. We add that into our return section. And now we can send a portion of the sound to this return track to add reverb onto it, just like that. It's pretty cool. Can click on the return track to see the device there. And we're going to want to turn this to 100% wet. So we're going to want to go to Audio Effects, grab the gate, put it after the reverb, and we're going to want to dial the threshold down to where we start hearing the sound being let through. As far as final processing on this, I added some EQ, rolled off the lows, boosted some of the highs. I'm going to turn down the return track. And add a compressor, medium attack, medium release, and a bit of saturation. And there you go. Now you know a couple of different ways to create some really great snare drums. I hope you found this helpful, and see you next time.